first siding with France in the 1780s, and then remaining neutral in the war between France and England in the 1790s. In contrast, Jefferson and Madison, who championed a more idealistic foreign policy based on solidarity among republics, stumbled into the War of 1812 when they failed to understand the balance of power among England, the United States, and Napoleon's France. Statecraft, as discussed in Chapter 3, may require the ability to combine aggressiveness with caution. President Abraham Lincoln did this when he acted prudently toward Britain and France, both of which supported the Southern cause, while prosecuting a relentless war against the Southern states. As mentioned, successful leaders have the ability to learn, including from their own mistakes. We will discuss in Chapter 4 how, as Assistant Secretary of the Navy, Theodore Roosevelt displayed an initial impulsive nationalism, advocating taking the Philippines from Spain in 1898 without understanding the difficulty of defending the islands from a rising Japan. As president, however, Roosevelt successfully mediated among the European and Asian powers while making America a naval world power for the first time. After World War I, Roosevelt and his close associate, Senator Henry Cabot Lodge, advocated for a political military partnership with Britain and France, as opposed to Woodrow Wilson's more idealistic but less practical League of Nations, with its emphasis on deterring aggression through international public opinion. Franklin Roosevelt's policy toward Europe before the entry of the United States into World War II epitomizes the diplomacy of guile, a sometimes useful element of statecraft. As discussed in Chapter 5, Roosevelt led a dovish American public slowly toward possible participation in World War II. His policy was secretive, devious, and relentless. During the war, he had no compunctions about making moral compromises to further the military effort. Beginning with Chapter 6, we examine historical cases from the post-World War II era. President Harry Truman, with his policy during the Korean War, is an example of a reasonable political leader who made serious mistakes in implementing otherwise well-founded policy, the defense of South Korea. Truman and his distinguished Secretary of State, Dean Acheson, were swept along in the triumphalism of General Douglas MacArthur's bid to unite the entire Korean peninsula after his dramatic military success at Incheon in September 1950. Truman could have avoided the ensuing disaster of Chinese intervention if he had listened to the advice of the more prudent State Department advisor, George Kennan. In Chapter 7, we see the importance of adapting to changing circumstances, as displayed by President Richard Nixon and Secretary of State Henry Kissinger during the 1973 Arab-Israeli War. Nixon and Kissinger first sent arms to Israel to avoid further Israeli military setbacks, and then saved the Egyptian army once the war turned in favor of Israel. The post-war negotiations under Kissinger between Israel and the Arabs also provide lessons on challenging international negotiations. Statecraft may involve the tensions inherent in difficult moral dilemmas and the need to stand up to public pressure. In Chapter 8, we examine the debates within the Carter administration in 1978 about whether to urge the Shah of Iran to crack down on Iranian protesters. Ignoring the advice of his national security advisor, Zbigniew Brzezinski, President Carter held back from doing so, only to blunder subsequently into an unrealistic attempt to liberate U.S. diplomatic personnel in Tehran. Careening from caution to recklessness, Carter also represented a turning point in U.S. foreign policy, initiating a new era in American politics in which candidates with no foreign policy experience became the norm for the first time since the 1920s. President George H.W. Bush, an exception to this new norm, displayed a surer touch in his diplomacy and wartime leadership during the first Gulf War in 1990 and 1991. He did not flinch when his military advisors told him that he would have to commit